Good afternoon, this is your Gentleman B970 from London, and I hope everybody in YouTube land is having a great time. So right away, we're just going to go straight into looking at the Outboard standalone stuff here, guys. These are not amplifiers that, I've always wanted. They've sort of like come along the way, so to speak, apart from the very large busking amp, which was kind of on my wish list for a few years. As you can see, next to that there's a smaller busking amp, which is a PV busking amp, and I got that busking amp in the sort of like early 90s. As you can see, so I've kind of customized it by putting waterproofing over it, so that if it started raining when I was busking, then it would kind of protect some of the circuitry in there. So what I did is I kind of put sort of like a waterproof protecting over it by customizing the amplifier many years ago. Underneath that, I've just got two indoor amplifiers, and again these came along the way. And so the very first one is the main one that we're looking at here is the Trucker guitar amp, and it's like a old 70s single kind of speaker guitar amp that you used to get in those days. In the late 80s and early 90s, people were really into sort of like stuff like Level 42 and Kajagoogoo, if you think about British music in those days. So using a guitar amp on bass really gave you that high end. The very big busking amplifier that I got recently with USB and Bluetooth for backing tracks, that's the reason why I got it, because when you put backing track kind of music on this kind of busking amp system, you get quite a good sound. What it is in places like Covent Garden and that, they're not really into buskers that do funk and stuff, you've got to play classical music or something. So, I was really playing funk really loud, and they came along and said, can you stop that? So it's loud enough to kind of start a street party kind of thing, and that's why I bought it, because I wanted to get that kind of power. The ideal setup would actually be to use the PV and the power hi-fi busking amp at the same time, and run the bass through both and have the backing track just on the power amp, and I think I really get a really interesting sound with that. So this is the Outboard stuff here, guys, and again, when you think in terms of guys like Mark Adams, and even with Bootsy and those kind of guys, all of those amplifiers can all be wired together to give me one sound on the bass. And this is something that people don't really talk about these days. They all talk about buying a pedal for their bass, but they never actually talk about getting separate speakers. If you get different speakers and wire them together, you get a really unique sound, and you can kind of control high and low ends on each speaker. The downside of that is that if you wire it too badly, you could get a little bit of slight delay in each of the sounds because of the signal and how the signal goes through each amplifier. When it hits the signal of the amplifier, it reaches the speakers at slightly different speeds, because they're all slightly different amplifiers. You might be able to get a really good sound, and I don't know whether people actually do that as a forum, about using multiple amplifiers on one bass rather than using a whole load of pedals that go into one amplifier. We're going to go straight into looking at Outboard, and you can actually see some of the Outboard stuff here, which is basically bass number 2, which is the Music Man copy, and I've got bass number 3, which is the Encore P-bass copy, which was a donation. And then I've got P-bass number 1, which is the star bass there, which is another P-bass copy that I've had for a long time. Over here, which is like another kind of PV guitar. Don't know much about guitars, but I'm sure people will know exactly what kind of PV 6-string guitar that is. It's got standard setup, and it's got the wow pedal there, as you can see. So that's really part two of gear, just basically the instruments that I would actually put into the interface. 3 basses, 1 electric guitar, 2 flutes, acoustic guitar, and 2 keyboards is basically all of the instruments that I kind of have here. So now this is where it really gets complicated when we start looking at the interface of what I actually use just before I go into the computers. So we're just going to have a look basically at that particular area with the computers and the actual interface area as it is. And it's basic, guys, really. It's no different than what anybody else would have.